Welcome back to Global Lens. The direct flights between India and China have resumed after a 5-year hiatus. The inaugural flight, carrying around 180 passengers, took off from Kolkata and landed in Guangzhou. Indian carrier Indigo took the lead, launching the service between the two nations. Starting November 10, Indigo will commence flights between New Delhi and Guangzhou, while China Eastern Airlines has announced direct services between Shanghai and Delhi beginning November 9. A clear sign of warming relations between the two nations. Chinese Deputy Consul General in Kolkata, Qin Yong, called this move a major improvement in ties between the neighbors. Businesses have welcomed the development. It will cut travel time significantly. On the flip side, China's refusal to lift curbs on exports of rare earth magnets is impeding India's EV ambitions. Reports suggest Beijing is ready to bring some relief, provided Delhi guarantees that the heavy rare earths will not be re-exported to the US and will be used solely for domestic needs. So what's next in India-China relations? Will China loosen its grip on rare earths, further strengthening the relationship? Joining us now to take this forward is Brahma Chellaney, Professor Emeritus of Strategic Studies at Center for Policy Research. Thank you very much for joining us, Mrs. Chellaney. Resumption of flights. Some would say it was a low-hanging fruit, but do you think this would lead to a normalization of ties?
This is a largely symbolic step because between any two countries, there should be commercial flights. But after China's 2022 incursions into eastern Ladakh, India decided to terminate commercial flights between the two countries. So after a gap of 5 years, the process of resuming commercial flights is only beginning from this week. But I think the larger issue is whether India and China can actually fully normalize their relations. There's already a normalized trade relationship. China enjoys a huge bilateral trade surplus with India of nearly $100 billion. That's larger than India's total defense spending. So these commercial flights will be useful for traders, especially traders from India, because many of them travel to China to procure goods for the Indian market. And these traders normally now have to take an indirect route to China. So these commercial flights will help them. But the bigger issue is whether, just the way Russia and China, which are historical rivals, today have an alliance of convenience, whether India and China likewise can forge a partnership of convenience. But that will be possible only if China stops springing nasty surprises on India periodically, or treating India as an adversary that needs to be contained, including by building up Pakistan as a counterweight. As you know, that the Sino-Pakistan axis is only strengthening, and clearly the common element driving both China and Pakistan to forge closer strategic ties is their animosity towards India and their imperative to contain India.
All right. You know, I would also like to ask you, Mr. Chellaney, about reports. There have been a lot of media reporting over the last few days as to how on the banks of Pangong Lake in Tibet, roughly 110 kilometers from the friction points of the 2020 border clashes, China is building air defense complexes. This is comprising command and control buildings, barracks, vehicle sheds, munition storage, and radar positions, and covered missile launch positions as well. So there's been a lot of extensive reporting on this. But to what extent are these reports correct and backed by actual satellite evidence?
What's happening in the Pangong Lake area is illustrative of what's happening across the entire line of actual control. There is a sustained effort by China to militarize the entire line of actual control with India. China is engaged in heavy militarization through a buildup of military infrastructure, including warfare facilities, and Pangong Lake area illustrates this broader heavy militarization of the Himalayan frontier. And through this heavy militarization, China is continuing to impose asymmetrical costs on India because of the ongoing militarization, India has to follow suit. India has to also then invest in building military infrastructure along the line of actual control. And this, in effect, means diverting resources. By creating this, by sustaining this military modernization, China keeps India focused on this higher altitude border. This hinders India's broader military modernization and strategic ambitions. But I think the key point is this, that after the Chinese encroachments of 2020, India and China, as you all know, had a prolonged military standoff, which has not been fully diffused, but the tensions have come down. But India, all along, for all these years, would say publicly that status quo ante, restoration of status quo ante, is a prerequisite to normalization of ties between the two countries. But what we're now seeing is that India is quietly moving to normalize ties with China, effectively dropping its demand for a return to the pre-2020 territorial status quo in Eastern Ladakh. And I think, and it's apparent even from Indian statements, because India's stance has shifted from restoration of status quo ante to the new terminology. The new terminology is peace and tranquility along the LAC. So India is no longer talking about status quo ante, but about peace and tranquility along the line of actual control.
Okay. All right. Mr. Chellaney, now, as far as rare earth magnets is concerned, this is the ultimate leverage that China seems to have over the world right now. They've not eased any controls for India. This is the word that is coming in from the industry. Do you expect China to start relaxing controls on rare earth magnets if the US-China meeting, if the Trump-Xi meeting in South Korea goes off well?
I think we have to keep in mind that the controls on rare earth magnets and rare earth materials by China is only one aspect of how China is restricting certain exports to India. The aim is that India should not emerge as a global manufacturing hub, as an alternative to China being the world's back factory. So to slow India's economic rise as a manufacturing base, as an alternative to China, China is restricting certain exports to India, also restricting the movement of skilled Chinese manpower to India. But in the context of rare earth exports, it's ironical to note that India has one of the world's largest reserves of rare earths, but India has not taken the steps to develop those rare earth deposits that it has, especially in the sands of Kerala. It could actually develop those rare earth materials and turn them into commercial exploitation, easing the constraints that India faces. But that's a long step because India hasn't taken even the preliminary steps of seeking to develop its rare earth deposits. But globally, as we have seen that because of China's near monopoly on rare earth supplies to almost the entire world, China has considerable leverage, which it's exerting even in its relationship with the US, which in fact has forced the US under Trump to seek a trade deal with China so that these curbs by China are eased, at least in relation to the US economy.
All right. Mr. Chellaney, thank you so much for joining us with that very important perspective. So will India pursue a status quo, a return to status quo as it existed before April 2020? That is the key question. Thanks once again for being with us. On to some trending stories that we are